Hey guys. Um, First, let me say this might be a little bit longer than my usual videos, and I apologize if you hear some banging in the background. I think my neighbor upstairs is doing some construction. Um, just another negative to living in an apartment building, but I just watched Stardusk's video called Some More Commentary on the AVFM and Some Thoughts on Female and Male Loyalty. The backstory here is that there was apparently an interview with Fido Bogan where he was telling MRAs in general that they should stop talking about female hypergamy. Full disclaimer, I've not listened to the interview as my response is more to Stardusk's point and expanding on some of them. Stardusk and Barbarossa both made videos explaining that they would continue to discuss hypergamy because it was important to both of them, and from their perspective, important for men who visit their channel to learn about. Um, as I was watching Stardusk's video, I started making notes for a video response. I wanted to talk a little about the infiltration and co-opting of the MRM by feminists, and as I got to the end of the video, Stardusk touched on it a bit, but I want to expand on it for a minute. First, a little background. I'm relatively new to the MRM, if you want to call it that. I don't necessarily mean the movement itself, but the people involved in talking about men's rights and anti-feminism. I've kind of been the odd man out throughout my life because I always contended that men got kind of a raw deal, especially when it came to reproductive rights and fathers' rights. When feminism infiltrated both the gaming community and the skeptics atheist community, I found Girl Writes What and a metric shit ton of other folks speaking about these issues. It was kind of like a breath of fresh air. While I've been, quote, involved for a short period of time, I can assure you that I've spent an incredibly inordinate amount of time researching, listening to, and discussing these issues in this short time. There are some topics discussed in this community that I'm not yet convinced about, but many others that I'm in full agreement with. I have also seen, as well as Stardusk, I've also seen a more politically correct, less offensive, quote unquote, message coming from certain folks as the MRM gets somewhat more mainstream, I guess. I've always been extremely pessimistic about men's rights ever gaining any significant political power simply because of our biological and social need to protect females from all ills, real or perceived, uh, as well as anything that they may find offensive. If you believe this, at least partially, but if you believe that this is at least partially biological, as I do, then I don't see how you could come to any other conclusion. Um, Perhaps those who feel the need to tone down the message recognize that the only way to ever advocate for men's rights in the mainstream will be to severely tone down the message enough to get a significant number of women on board. While I agree that this is probably the case, I still don't think it's a good idea and probably still won't work. Let me paint you a picture that probably sounds crazy, but before you start furiously typing about what an idiot I am in the comments, um, just try to hear me out. I think that there's a very real possibility that the mainstream MRM will be co-opted by feminists if a trend to female appeasement and political correctness pushes into the mainstream. I realize that sounds crazy, and even Stardusk wasn't willing to go that far. Let me explain by first looking at the history of some fringe groups that push into the mainstream. The comic book world was traditionally a modest, male-dominated group of people brought together by their love of comic books and related films, graphic novels, TV shows, etc. During its early years, you were a geek and a loser if you were part of this group. You've all heard the tired old shaming tactic that these kind of geeks, never got laid, lived in their mother's basement, and needed to man up. Where have we all heard these types of things before? Now, when geek culture started becoming cool and multi-million-dollar comic book movies and incredibly popular TV shows started pushing comic book culture into the mainstream, um, what was one of the first things we saw? We saw females joining these groups in droves, exhibiting hypoagency in a full court press, and now all we hear about is how misogynistic comic books are, and how females are sexually harassed by angry neckbeard misogynists at Comic Con, etc. Um, this was only able to take place because the guys who built the community from the ground up started making concessions to make the environment more comfortable for women. This was all it took for feminists to infiltrate the group and immediately demand all sorts of things. Now let's look at the video game culture. Here's another group, male-dominated, who are also subject to shaming tactics directed at their apparent lack of manhood, insults about living in their parents' basement, and how they never get laid. This is another group that has suffered tremendous detriment due to female hypoagency and the infiltration of feminists. Again, females were, for the most part, not really interested in this group until it became more mainstream. Now, like the comic book culture, it's overwhelmed with feminists claiming women at gaming events are being harassed and threatened by misogynists, and that the culture must change to accommodate the feelings of the lowest common denominator. This would not have been possible without the guys in the community making concession after concession. This is despite the gaming culture, like many other male-dominated spaces, historically being very competitive, complete with a ton of trash talking that forced people to either compete at a high level or stand on the sidelines. In other words, as with mostly all other male-dominated communities, political correctness and people's feelings was not a priority. It was a true meritocracy. HTArcade has made a couple of excellent videos on this topic, specifically as it relates to the gaming culture, and I'll link them below. The final one I'll talk about is the skeptic atheist community. This is another community that was male-dominated, although not quite as much as the previous two examples I've given. This is a community that, at its heart, rejects ideological dogma in all forms as one of its core tenets. Yet still, all you have to do is look at what's happened over the last year or more to see the exact same behavior. The community itself becomes more mainstream, more women want to join, and with that comes unbelievable and unreasonable demands for comfort and equal opportunity by way of affirmative action. By affirmative action, I mean that the selection of female speakers based not on their merit alone, but the fact that at least 50% of speakers should be women, even though that doesn't represent the demographics of the atheist community. They've started an all-out war on the community, saying they're harassed and threatened by misogynists in the community, and that the community needs to do everything feminists say in order to appease them, which we all know is an unreachable goal, even if it was a worthy one, which it's not. None of this is possible without the guys in the community making concession after concession to appease every whim of the most easily offended or self-entitled female member. I don't see any reason why the MRM, or at least its more mainstream arm, couldn't be infected by the same hypoagency and feminism, if the same concessions are made as in the examples I've given. Imagine a mainstream equality movement where, I don't know, say some fathers' rights issues were integrated into the platform. Many more females would likely be able to get on board with a more toned-down movement pushing into the mainstream that focused on a few key fathers' rights issues. This group might push to award additional rights for fathers without talking about biological underpinnings of anything in their advocacy wheelhouse. Now suppose the movement grows and gets enough female support that it becomes close to 50% female, where females are given equal speaking time at engagements, where feelings become more important than the advocacy itself. Do you really think that this type of mainstream movement, with some fathers' rights issues included, is not something that feminism could infiltrate, co-opt, and then destroy? I think we can all agree it's unlikely the MRM in its, quote, traditional state would ever accept this, But how much does the tone and language have to change before women feel comfortable enough to join the cause? How mainstream does it have to get before we get the same thing that happened in the atheist community, the gaming community, and the comic community? Any community where the language and tone matters even half as much as the message is vulnerable to this type of infiltration and destruction by feminism. Anyway, I'll link to Stardusk's video below. I'm going out of the country for work tomorrow for a week, a little over a week. So I probably won't be making any videos for a couple weeks, although I will be around in the comments sections. Oh, also, if anyone has any books they recommend, I'm looking for a new one to bring with me. So anything you could recommend, put in the comments below. I'd appreciate it. Anyway, thanks for watching.